Welcome to our webinar on Practice Ownership, a means to control your destiny. My name is Dr. Pat Wolfers-Bethke. This career presentation is brought to you by the AVMA, which represents more than 89,000 member veterinarians from all fields of the profession, and the AVMA Veterinary Career Center. The VCC is a well-known niche professional job board for your veterinary career needs, including job search and career assistance, and is the founding member of the Veterinary Career Network. Jobs posted on any of the 50 VCN partner sites are seen on every site on the network, making your job search easier. Find us on Facebook at AVMA Vets and Twitter at AVMA Vet Jobs. You are in listen mode only. If you have any questions during the presentation, type them into the question area on your control panel. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted at avma.org/career-webinars. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Peter Weinstein. Dr. Weinstein received his DVM from the University of Illinois. He has been a practice owner, has worked in the pet insurance industry, and is now a small business and corporate consultant, as well as the executive director of the Southern California Veterinary Medical Association. He is a member of the AVMA's Economic Strategy Committee, and he is an author and speaker on topics focused on making veterinary medicine better for those in the profession. I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Weinstein.
Thank you, Dr. Pat, and thanks to all of you. And let's just make sure that you can see my screen. How's that looking, Dr. Pat?
It's looking good. Whoops, I got to make the screen bigger.
There we go.
There we go. Now we got it.
All right. Thanks so much for everybody for joining us today. I know everybody's got busy schedules and life gets in the way. I think this discussion is relevant to all sorts of different audiences. As Dr. Pat noted, I am a U of I grad. I also went back and got my MBA. And just a little bit of a story because it relates to what we're going to talk about today. I started my practice as a startup about 3 years out of school, recognizing that I knew little about running a business except for what I could learn from having worked as an associate. And after about 2 years in practice, I realized how little I knew about the details, the accounting, the human resources, the laws. I knew how to be a veterinarian. I didn't really know how to be a business owner. So I went back to school at night and got an MBA, which helped me grow my practice, expand it, move it, expand it, and then eventually sell it to a corporate consolidator. Since the sale of my practice, I've done some consulting work, both with small hospitals, large hospitals, and industry. Currently, my role as the executive director of the Southern California Veterinary Medical Association has me in touch with over 900 hospitals and 1,600 veterinarians and staff and industry. So I'm kind of tuned into some of the issues that are out there. I visit a lot of veterinary schools speaking, and I really enjoy visiting the veterinary schools and talking to the students and seeing what our future in the profession is going to look like. Recently, I've had the opportunity to co-author The E-Myth Veterinarian with Michael Gerber, and you can find that on Amazon. And a lot of the things and the principles that we used in the development of my practice was based upon the principles of the E-Myth revisited from Michael Gerber. As a veterinary student, the business acumen that they provided for us was very limited. And I'm not sure that I really even was thinking about being a business owner once I got into veterinary school. I think I was just happy to get through veterinary school. And it wasn't until I started working for other veterinarians and recognizing what the opportunities were that I decided I wanted to be a hospital owner. Now, when I was a hospital owner, student debt wasn't nearly the issue what it is right now. And for those of you who are on the call, whether you are a recent graduate, a student or been out of school for a while, student debt is definitely a barrier and a burden. And here are some facts. First of all, 89% of veterinary students who graduate have some sort of student debt. The average debt is approximately $170,000. I haven't updated this slide in a little while, so it may be plus or minus right around there. The full-time starting salary is around 70, and that is demographically dependent, depending on where you are in the country and the type of position you start out at. The salary may be significantly higher or significantly lower, which means you have about a $6,000 per month income before taxes. Now, $6,000 a month seems a lot when you are in school, but once you get out, that income after taxes starts to drop significantly. And then that also, of that $6,000, you have a loan payment that is going to be approximately $1,500 per month. So, especially if you're in that average of 170K. So you look at that and you say, I now have about $4,500 per month, actually significantly lower than that, after taxes on which to live. And you wonder, as a student or a recent graduate, can I really do this? Can I take and afford to buy a practice when I've got $170,000 or more of debt? I mean, does it make any sense? I've got this huge debt sitting over my head, and I'm really focused on that. How can I afford to buy a practice? I'm more focused on just trying to be a good veterinarian with the clients that I see. But I want you to think differently. I want you to get rid of that burden, and the one way I want you to do it is I want you to think how can you not afford to buy a practice with $170,000 or more in debt. And I want to explain to you why, whether you're a student, recent graduate, or even an associate, that owning a hospital can be a great way of making a difference in your debt service. But I do recognize that there's a tremendous amount of concern and fear. One of those is owning and running a business. If you've never owned or run a business before, can you do it? If you're a good veterinarian, does that mean you're going to be a good business owner? So which is your greater fear, owning and running a business or being owned and run by your student debt? Because I do know, and especially if you read the listservs and the other communications and the Facebook posts by recent graduates, that this student debt is really weighing down very heavily on everything we do in practice and everything we do outside of practice and the ability to try to find this life balance. So here's your fears. Is owning and running a business scarier than being owned and run by your student debt? Well, let's take a look at some things. How can you get over those fears? And if your greatest fear is that of owning a business, well, there are some things that you can do. There are some things that you can focus on. Developing some business acumen and just really understanding how small business operates. And there are different ways you can go about doing that. Developing your communication skills. And I don't mean the doctor talk in the room, although that is very important and a big differentiator amongst what makes veterinarians successful. I'm talking about communication skills with your team. I'm talking about communication skills with industry and vendors and a variety of different communications, both speaking, and that includes public speaking, and written communication skills. What about mentorship? Your ability to mentor those people who are working with you or working for you, whether they are technicians or animal caretakers or doctors. As a business owner, leadership, well, that's really foundational. If you want to get your people to follow you to be successful, you really need to develop some leadership skills. Not everybody is born with them, but there are some ways to develop them. And then I think the strongest thing that you can do in a practice situation is to hire your weaknesses. And that may mean hiring a practice manager or administrator to handle those things that intimidate you, that threaten you, that make you feel uncomfortable. Build a team around you. That's on the next slide, actually. Developing calluses. Well, those are emotional calluses, because if you go and read your Yelp reviews or your Google reviews, you have to develop somewhat of a thick skin and learn how to deal with those and respond to them. Resiliency. Practice and small business success comes from perseverance and resiliency, and your ability to kind of switch gears at different times throughout the day, the week, the month, and that ability to be resilient in the face of economic challenges, weather-based challenges. Think about the resiliency necessary for hospital owners right now in Houston and Florida and, I mean, Puerto Rico. So this ability to be resilient and handle the challenges that are around you. The soft skills, these are not skills that are taught in veterinary school. These are not part of the veterinary curriculum as a rule. They've been added more in doctoring classes and some of the business classes, but those soft skills of interviewing and reviews and, again, communication and motivation. Developing your own emotional intelligence. I don't think emotional intelligence was even in the vocabulary when I was in veterinary school. And then, I think I mentioned it earlier, but building a team, surrounding yourself with experts, not necessarily within the practice, but surrounding yourself with experts that could be outside of your practice. Accountants, attorneys, consultants, bankers, amongst others, who can help you make the right decisions. Build a team around you with experts that you can rely on and depend upon so that they can help you get over those fears that you may have about running the business. So when it comes to buying a veterinary practice, whether you're right out of school, 5 years, 10 years, or whomever level of education you are in listening right now, or graduation listening right now, student debt is not your barrier to buying a veterinary practice. You are. The debt is taken into consideration by the banks and others when it comes to setting up or developing a practice. And if you have no student debt, then take that out of the picture. But if buying a practice has barriers, it's all in your head. You can own a hospital if you do some of the things we talked about in the last couple of slides, and most importantly, if you recognize what it is to run a small business. So what do you need to consider before buying a practice? I'm going to kind of go on a variety of different tangents in this discussion. First of all, you need to understand the 4 forms of money. And there are 4 forms of money. Income is what you earn. It's your salary. It's your paycheck. Profit is what your business earns. When you take the expenses from the income and you have something left, that's called profit. That's a good thing. Cash flow, or flow, is the movement of money in a business. Money comes in, money goes out. Where's it going? Where's it being spent? And it's the movement of money within the business, or in each of you individually, your personal cash flow. Where's your salary coming in, and where are your expenses? And then equity is the value of a business over time. So equity is if you buy a business today and you sell it 10 years from now, how much equity was built in that business by what you did to develop the business. You buy a house in 1990 and you sell it in 2010, over 20 years that house has developed equity, and you've paid off the mortgage and you now own it, and you've developed equity, which is something you can sell and get a return on. As an associate, looking at these 4 forms of money, working for somebody else, there's only one that you have any control over, and that's what you earn. So of those 4 forms of money, as an associate, you could only control one of the four forms of money from a business standpoint. You can develop your own personal equity within your house, but from a veterinarian standpoint, as a practicing veterinarian, you can only control your income. Your earning capacity, essentially what you could earn at any one point in time, is limited to your salary plus or minus your production. So many of you are paid on a production basis. You are limited to what you can produce and what is paid to you as a salary, and it depends 100% on your ability to make your clients, your patients, and your staff happy. You are very dependent on everybody else around you to help create that salary and production. So you want to make $100,000 per year in salary? That's cool. That's great. How do you do it? Well, you can produce $500,000 in revenue for the practice. And I'm using some round numbers and some ballparks, but what we do is we normally budget about 20% of your revenue or a practice's revenue for veterinary salaries. And that's a range. I'm just using the center of the range. But let's use 20% because it's easy to calculate. If we do that, you produce $500,000, you can earn $100,000 per year in salary. That doesn't sound too intimidating, does it? Well, let's take a look at it. If you work 2,000 hours per year, that's looking at a 40-hour work week, which we know can be a 60-hour work week, and you are working 50 weeks per year, that's 2 weeks of vacation, and you bill out at $250 per hour, there's $500,000. So you could see one client per hour and generate $250, or you can see 2.5 clients, one client every 20 minutes or so, and bill at $100 per client. But if you miss a day, an appointment, or for anything for free, all of a sudden your average billing price goes down. You see fewer clients, and your ability to produce $500,000 in revenue is impacted by all of these different variables. I have seen individual doctors produce $1 million in revenue by learning how to leverage their staff around them, by seeing a larger number of clients, by having average client transaction fees. But essentially, you are limited in your income to what you can produce. So if you're making $100,000 per year, that's great. You can recognize that taxes are going to take a huge hit on that, and then you have expenses. And those expenses are all different things that you are invested in. And it's a balancing act now between the income that you have coming in and the expenses that you have going out. You sometimes, and I know many of you, are working 2 or 3 jobs to maintain this balancing act. Here's your income, and then look at these expenses. You have a rent or a mortgage. You have a car payment. You've got a student loan payment. You have to eat. I mean, you graduate from veterinary school with the thought that you don't have to eat top ramen anymore, I hope. You've got utilities to pay. You might want to have a little bit of fun, and then taxes and a plethora of other expenses. So by the time you get done taking a look at your salary and then your expenses, you really have a challenge. So one of the things I would strongly suggest for any of you who are listening is to start to develop a personal budget. There is software on your phone called Mint. There's software called Quicken. QuickBooks is more for business related, but anything you can do to develop a personal budget and look at where your money is coming from, your personal money, and where your expenses are going, I think you can make a huge difference in identifying how to control how much money is left at the end of the month versus how much month is left at the end of the money. So a personal budget is very important, whether you're going to own a business or not, to see how things are going. And Mint, I believe the software is free and you can download it for your smartphones. Quicken you can purchase and put on your computers. This is a lifetime tool that will help you become successful. So you make money, you spend money, and hopefully there's something left, and profit, whether you're talking about your personal money or the money that you have coming in the business, is what's left. And hopefully there's money that's left over, because that money that's left over personally now can be invested. It can be invested in paying down debt. It can be invested in home repair. It could be put into a bank for retirement, however you want to look at it, but profit is a good thing. So your earning capacity as an associate is limited to either a fixed salary, a production-based pay, or what they call pro-sal, which is kind of a combination of guaranteed salary plus some bonuses based upon production. Can you earn as much as you can as an associate? Sure you can, but you're always going to be behind what owners make when it comes down to it. So $50,000 a year is what owners make more than their associates. How much could you retire in terms of student debt with an additional $50,000 per year? So your associate earning capacity is based upon salary and depends upon you. Owners, however, earning capacity comes in multiple ways. They can be paid a salary, and they should be. They will also be able to get profit or return on investment from how the business does. Now, of course, there's a risk and reward. When the business does well, they get profit. When the business does not do well, they could take a personal hit to just keep the bills being paid. Owners can take a management salary for managing the practice. They can also, if they own the dirt that the practice is on or the shopping center that the practice is in, they could pay themselves a rent or a mortgage. So there's different ways that owners can earn with the property that they own. And then over time, they're building equity. They're building a value in a tangible asset. So owners have a dependence upon the success of the business when it comes to their earning capacity, while an associate depends upon the success just for themselves and the people that support them from an earning capacity standpoint. So as an owner, you have a much greater opportunity to make money than you do as an associate, just because you're using money in so many different ways. From the standpoint of the four forms of money, the owner's got all four on their side, whereas an associate, you only had income. To buy a practice, what do you need? Well, there are four things that you can benefit from. One is your own equity, and that could be owning a house or other things, and capital that you may have. Your personal credit score. Any collateral. Collateral is a tangible item that you could put up as a risk holder, something that somebody else could come for in case you default on a loan. And then your personal cash flow. You know, how is your cash flow going? And banks will look at all of these different things. From an equity standpoint, do you own anything? A house, a car, real estate, stocks? Do you have a savings account? Is there anything in it? And what kind of investments do you have? So do you have anything tangible that is giving you some return on investment personally? So equity is something that is a good thing to have personally. What about your credit score? Well, some of us have made mistakes at different periods of time, filed bankruptcies, whatever the case may be, but your credit score is very, very important. If you can keep your credit card debt under control and make sure that you're paying down your credit card debt and keep that credit score really high, the banks are going to look at that because they don't want you to be a credit risk as a buyer. And if you have a credit risk as an individual, they're concerned about, will you have a credit risk as a business owner? Capital or liquidity. How much cash can you get your hands on? Can you sell some things without necessarily impacting your equity? Can you borrow some money from family? Do you have cash sitting around? Because if you're going to buy something or if you're going to start something up, you need some cash. Banks rarely, and I'm not a banker, but banks rarely will loan 100% on a business, whether it's a startup or a purchasing an existing practice. So you're going to need some cash or some capital to be able to make a down payment or to get that startup going. And then personal financial statement. Let's call it a budget. Let's call it using Mint or Quicken. What does it look like? Where is your money going? Are you spending a lot of money on entertainment? Are you spending a lot of money on food? A lot of money on clothes? Do you have a fancy car, but you have nothing on the refrigerator? So, and are your expenses greater than your income? So your bankers are going to look under the microscope at your personal financial statement to see how do you and how responsible are you when it comes to your own personal expenses. Because again, what you do at home is frequently reflected in what you will do within the business. So can you do it? Can you make it work? Well, if your credit score is good, if you have some capital, if you have a good overall financial position, and if you have some collateral, something that can be held, then you're in a good position. But there's still one more variable. And the variable is, what kind of cash flow does the business have? So when I did my startup, my cash flow on my first day, March 1989, cash flow, first day, $300. And I was stoked. It was a start. But that meant I was eating top ramen again because no cash flow, no salary. Okay? So as an owner, I have that risk that I have to concern myself about. On the other hand, if I buy into a practice that has very good existing cash flow, then I have a great opportunity to be able to be making money right from the start. What kind of cash flow does the practice have? Very, very important when looking at a practice to buy. How is the cash flow? What does the profit look like? Where's the money going to? How much is the owner taking home? And all of these different things that an appraiser and a advisor will help you out with. And when it comes down to it, the questions are going to be, can a doctor make a living from the practice? Can the doctor make a living from the income from the practice and pay down the debt of the practice as well as make an income for themselves? Can a doctor make a living from the practice, salary, et cetera, return, and pay down the debt on the purchase of the practice? Or, putting it another way, does the business support the debt of the buying of the office and the debt of the DVM buyer? They're two different things. You're going to have a loan for the purchase of the business that you're going to have to pay down, and then obviously you will have your own personal expenses. Can the income from the business support paying off the loan as well as paying you a fair and equitable salary and some return on that investment? What does it take for you to buy a practice? Again, good credit score, good character, and good cash flow. Thank you to Simmons and Associates for the 3 C's. I like that. Good credit score, FICO above 650 to 700, good character, you as a person, and good cash flow. From the bank or lender standpoint, they're going to look at the practice cash flow, money coming in, money going out, where it's going to. They're going to look at your salary that you're going to need as a buyer, the salary that reflects what you're producing as a veterinarian, and that could help you maintain the lifestyle to which you become accustomed and also help you retire your debt. So your lifestyle includes that student debt if you have any. And then the lenders want to make sure there's a safety margin, the rainy day hurricane margin, and also if that practice doesn't grow as predicted. We always like to hope that practices are going to continue to grow, and especially when you take over a new practice and make some changes. But there's always got to be kind of that rainy day fund. And then finally, after we take those out, will there be cash left over for debt service on the practice loan? When that is all taken into consideration, if there is money left over, if there's a positive number, that's a good thing. So if you start with $1 and you take your salary out at 30 cents, you take your safety margin out at 10, and your debt service out at 20, and I'm using metaphorical numbers, that's 60. That's a positive number. That's a good thing. Does it work that way all the time? No. So you have to be thinking about, can all of these different variables work together? The practice purchase price has to allow for payment of your salary as an owner, has to allow for payment of the loan for the purchase of the business or the startup of the business, and it has to include a rainy day fund for unexpected situations that might occur. If all of those can be taken into consideration, that's a good thing. Does it work? When you take all those things into consideration, the salary, the debt payment on the profit, and your cost of living, is there money left over? That's a good thing. But you can't do that when you're just living on a salary. The profit makes a big difference in your ability to pay yourself a higher amount and to retire your loans, whether they're the practice loans or the student loans, so that that money is being slowly funneled out and not rapidly draining away. Income from the business has to provide you with a salary that, as well as a profit, can help you pay off the business loan, home loan, student loans, auto loans, taxes, and still leave something left from a living expense standpoint. And when it's truly a profitable business, actually allows you to put money back into the business itself or into the bank for retirement, because even though you're not even thinking about retirement as you're buying this practice, the sooner you start to put money away for retirement, the sooner you're starting to build a lot of equity. So it's not just the student loan debt you have to worry about, it's all of the other debt on top of your student debt that is of concern. Does it help to be the perfect practice? Absolutely. It sure helps to get that perfect practice. And so take your time as you're looking to be an owner. It can get really exciting, but if the cash flow isn't there, if the ability to retire debt isn't going to be there, don't buy something that you think you can fix unless you truly know what you're getting yourself into. Can you afford to buy a practice with $250,000 or $170,000 in student debt? Or can you not afford not to? Well, that's the question you have to ask yourself. And so let's take a summary. Student debt isn't a barrier. However, your personal budget needs to be in control. If you're constantly having to go deeper into debt to just survive or to get into credit card debt, that's a problem. So your credit score must be good. You've got to be paying down your loans. You've got to be paying off your credit cards. You really do need some business acumen or a support team to help you become successful. It really helps to identify resources that can be part of your team that you can tap into when you're facing a challenge. Veterinary medicine is a team sport. We can't survive without good technicians, good receptionists, good animal caretakers, good managers, and we can't survive without surrounding ourselves with accountants and bookkeepers and consultants and lawyers and financial planners. So build that team around you. And then importantly, the practice cash flow and profitability must be able to pay the loans, that's the business loan, and pay you as the owner sufficiently to allow you to live the lifestyle to which you become accustomed and retire debt. Why should you? Why should you even consider buying a hospital? Because it will give you a tangible asset. It will give you equity. You have a much greater earning potential. There are some tax benefits that your accountants can help you with. It will give you independence. Theoretically, it'll give you independence. You still own a business and responsibilities associated therewith, but it's your business. And will give you ROI, which is called return on investment. It's like owning a stock, but you are in control of how successful that stock is. You have to ask yourself a couple of questions, though. Are you ready? Do you have the leadership skills? Do you have the communication skills? Do you have a little bit of business acumen? What about that entrepreneurial spirit? that desire to make a difference in the lives of other people, the people who work for you. How about some problem-solving skills? And I just don't mean orthopedic surgery problem-solving skills. I mean marketing and how to get people in the front door and how to keep them coming back. Good clinical skills, absolutely. Discipline, financial discipline, self-discipline, the ability to delegate, and the ability to manage your time. All of these tools, resources, ideas are foundational to making a business successful. Are you ready? Can you get these skills? Do you have them already? Well, those are all the questions that you need to ask yourself, because I do think, in my opinion, that owning a practice is one of the best ways, if not the best way, to pay down your student debt on time and retire that burden, that anchor that's carrying you around. So that's a great overview. I want to take some questions, and I know that Pat and I were going to do some discussion, because I do think that this is an area that is rife for all sorts of questions. So Pat, I'm going to throw it back to you to make sure that we get some of the questions that we already have answered, as well as any other questions that get posted.
Okay, will do. I think one of the biggest questions people have is, as a practice owner, how are you able to balance family time and free time with your obligation as a business owner? The old, work-life balance question that I think really scares a lot of people.
Well, I would suggest that when I did my startup, it was definitely impacting work-life balance, because with no cash flow, there were times I was answering the phone, doing baths, cleaning cages, walking dogs on weekends, going in. So as a startup, I definitely had some impact on work-life balance. Once the practice was successful and working smoothly and operationally, then I was in charge of my own schedule. So I could work 3 days a week, and the practice was generating income for me as an owner, by my associates and by my team, so that I could be there for my kids' swim meets and soccer games. But you have to get that practice to be working smoothly, to have all the systems in place and operations in place before that work-life balance kind of comes into control. And I would probably suggest for the first year or two, maybe the first year or three, because you're wanting to make sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. You're going to make some personal sacrifices to make sure that that practice is right. But if you want to control your work, if you want to ultimately control your work-life balance, you have to be in control of your work-life balance. And the only way to do that is from an ownership standpoint, or else you're always working for the man.
Right. And you had mentioned earlier that you got an MBA. I have a lot of questions coming in about how to get the experience to be a practice owner or a leader. And you mentioned you had an MBA. Is that one of the steps that people need to take?
You don't need to get an MBA, okay? I come from a genetic background of both math, science, and so I had a dad who was a CPA, MBA, and a mother who was a biology teacher, and a grandfather who was an MD. So the MBA was the other set of the gene pool that I hadn't followed in school. So I went back and got the MBA, and it was a world difference maker for me. However, it was a 2-year investment of a lot of time, because I did it while I was running my practice. You don't need an MBA. You can get some very good business experience by working in a practice that has good business systems in place, and following the manager and learning from the manager and learning from ownership, and being invested in the business side of it, number one. Number two, you can attend coursework through VMI, Veterinary Management Institute, which I believe is through AHA, and at Purdue University. They've got some great programs there to help people understand the business of running a veterinary hospital. You can attend the major meetings, AVMA in July, North American now VMX, Western Veterinary Conference, WVC, the CVC meetings, AHA meetings. There are some very good practice management programs that are out there as well. I would strongly suggest reading business-related books outside of the veterinary profession, whether it is books on business, whether it's books on motivation and perseverance, all sorts of great resources that are out there. I'm going to do a little self-promotion, but I think the number one best book that I read on how to run a business is The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. I think that's a minimum reading. There are some great lists of reading resources that are available for those people, but some of this can be self-taught, but it all goes back to one of the earlier slides, which is also surrounding yourself with people around you who have your best interest in mind and can handle those things that you're not good at. If you need an HR specialist, hire an HR specialist. If you need financial help, hire a bookkeeper, an accountant, or a financial planner, and just make sure you have access to the resources that you need. Sometimes it's not the content of the book that's important. Sometimes it's the table of contents or the index that's more important, so you know where to find the answers, and those are the people you surround yourself with.
And how about, I have questions about buying a practice, an existing practice, and is that a good idea? Are they still available in light of the corporate acquisition of practices, and will the independent practices survive?
There's like 3 questions in there.
Sorry.
So first, it's okay. First of all, there are independent practices for sale. You have to find them. You have to be patient. You need to tap into some of the resources, and whether those are hospital brokers or other transitional experts who can help you find the right practice. But yes, I would strongly suggest looking to buy an existing practice with good cash flow that has the profitabilities and the numbers to support you and all those things we talked about. And so yes, if you can find the right practice, I would buy that first before doing a startup. I think we can compete with corporate consolidators in the purchase of practices if we can talk to banks and help find different ways to finance the purchase of an independent practice, and do so by finding those experts around you, those lending experts, the appraisers who can help you buy that practice and still give the owner the equity or the return on their investment they're looking for as well. One of the biggest reasons that corporate consolidators have been very attractive to those people who want to sell to them is the fact that they are providing a very good return on the practice cash flow. Well, I think there are ways, and there have been some very good recent articles. I think Karen Felstead had an article recently in DVM 360. There are some very different ways to look at the purchase of a practice so that the current owner gets what they're looking for in return, and the buyer can afford to retire the debt without being strangled by debt. So in answer to your questions, definitely look to buy an existing practice that meets the needs from a cash flow and a profitability standpoint. Look at competitive pricing using different ways to pay down or to structure the purchase from that standpoint. And independent practices can compete with the corporate consolidators when it comes to sales, but you have to think differently. And I would challenge anybody who's listening to think differently. We've been doing it the same way in veterinary medicine for way too long. How can we think differently in buying existing practices, remaining independent, and still being successful? I think independent practices are much more flexible, much more mobile. They're more like a speedboat that you can turn when things are needing to be turned, whereas the corporate consolidators are more of a cruise ship that has to turn much more slowly, not to rock the boat. So I think I answered all those questions for you.
I think you did. A lot of people were asking about where do you find the team? You know, you keep talking about finding a team to hire your weakness. So how do you suggest finding an attorney, and what kind of attorney? I know there's different attorneys, you know, an accountant and a practice evaluator, all those people. Where do you find them?
Okay, first of all, I would look for veterinary specific accountants because they understand the business. And there are some very specific veterinary-specific accountants and veterinary-specific attorneys. When it comes to attorneys, you're going to look at a human resource attorney because we tend to get ourselves into trouble with hiring and firing. You're going to need a transactional attorney who can help you with buy-sell. You may need a contract attorney. They could all be the same person. Bottom line, the best source for a general place to go for finding all of those things, accountants, attorneys, marketing people, etc., would be the Vet Partners website, vetpartners.org. And Vet Partners is the national consultants group. They have hospital appraisers in there, and many of them will be close to wherever you are listening in the country, or Canada, or even outside the country. So vetpartners.org has a membership directory, and you can search for resources there. The other resource, if you're looking for a hospital manager or administrator, is the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association. V as in Victor, H as in Henry, M as in Mary, A as in Apple.org, VHMA.org. And the Veterinary Hospital Managers Association also provides a certification program for certified veterinary practice managers. These are the Cadillacs. Okay, that shows my age. They are the Teslas of the practice managers out there. They have a certification, they have an education, they've passed some tests, but the VHMA.org is a great resource to find managers, to find CVPMs, and to find information about practice management as well. So I think those are two good places. And then the major organizations, AVMA and AHA, have some resources as well that they can tap into. And I think if you go to these larger meetings, you will meet other colleagues. I think getting recommendations from your colleagues is probably as important as anything when it comes down to finding resources, because they've been vetted by people who are going through what you've planned to go through. And I think that if you're in a community and you haven't made friends with the veterinarians around you, I think it's very important to do so that you can learn from their mistakes. Find the resources that work, architects, contractors that they've worked with, find the accountants that they've worked with, find the bookkeepers, the consultants. Tap into your colleagues around you for some of the resources, because I think you can find those who have been vetted already. But otherwise, vetpartners.org, VHMA.org are two really good places to find some of those people.
Thank you. Now, there's a co-ownership model out there. It's where you partner with a company that manages the business and marketing aspects while you concentrate on the clinical direction. What do you think of that opportunity and that model?
I think any different business model is worth looking into, but it is going to be very people dependent. In other words, you, the veterinarian, being able to work with that partner. So you're going to sacrifice some things when you ask somebody to come in and do those things, and what you're probably doing is sacrificing those things that you don't enjoy, which is fine. But I would make sure that you reach out to them and understand fully what responsibilities they have and what responsibilities you have in this partnership, and how they will be compensated and how you will be compensated. And make sure that you, as the business owner, the one with the greatest responsibility, will continue to receive more than just a salary, that your return on investment and your equity is going to continue to grow. And also make sure that you have those contracts very clearly reviewed so that you understand how you can get out, they understand how they can get out, and if you're looking to sell down the road, how that all works. So I may not fully understand this co-ownership model, but I would just make sure that you have all the answers to all of your questions answered. Is it going to work for everybody? No. Is it a great solution for those people who just want to be a veterinarian and maybe the business side of things is their weak point? It could. But do your due diligence, dive into it, talk to practices who have gone that route and find out how happy they are, how satisfied they are, and make sure that it's going to be the right choice for you. I want to just talk about other business models to think about as well. In some states, you can have non-veterinary ownership of a practice. I think you should consider, as you buy a practice, looking to partner with maybe even a hospital manager or even a technician, and maybe 3 doctors each owning 20%, and a manager who owns 20%, and a technician owns 20%. You now have 100% ownership of the business, and everybody's got what we call skin in the game. They've got ownership so that everything they do makes the practice more profitable in general, but profitable for them as well. So look to find others to partner with within your office to help make that practice work more effectively and efficiently. And in many ways, if that hospital manager has ownership as well, and all you have to do is what you do well as a doctor and just get out of their way, that practice can be very, very, very successful. And the manager now has some return for their investment of time and energy as well. So think differently in terms of business models. You want to look at a work-life balance. 2 single doctors, each owning, let's say, 50%, each working 3 days a week, you now have 1 full-time equivalent doctor, 50% ownership, and only working a 3-day work week. It all depends on profitability and how well people get along with one another. I'll go back to a line I used earlier. Veterinary medicine is a team sport. You have to learn how to work with the people around you to make sure that the team is rowing in the same direction. Even in a single doctor practice, you've got to make sure everybody is rowing in the same direction. And when you put together a partnership, well, think of it as a marriage. So you want to just make sure that the person you're marrying or your partner and you have a common vision, a common goal, and clearly define that up front before you get married.
Well, you answered a lot of questions that have been coming in, and so that's wonderful. I have a question about if somebody is currently wanting to buy a practice in a few years, but they're renting a house but want to buy a house this spring. Does that all come into play with the bank considering debt? A house rental versus a house ownership in the middle of trying to buy a practice.
So, house ownership gives you equity. House rental gives you expense. If you can if you can buy a house and pay the same on your mortgage as you're currently paying to rent that house, but you are concurrently building equity by ownership, if you look at your income statement or expenses on that side, your expenses don't change. If you're paying $3,000 a month for rent or $3,000 a month for mortgage, your income doesn't change. Your tax benefits are there because you own something. You have collateral because you own the house. You have equity because you own the house. As long as you are paying that mortgage down, and the practice now I'm going to go to the practice. If the practice you're looking to buy has sufficient cash flow and sufficient equity and sufficient profitability, and I'm the bank, I'm looking, owns the house versus rent. I like this person. They are looking to be smart business people by owning the house versus renting. It's a smart way of investing their money, is to put it into the house instead of a rent. Maybe they will be just as smart in running the business. And as long as you're not going from $3,000 in rent to $6,000 in mortgage, then I don't think that should be a problem. In fact, you could probably reach out to any of the veterinary specific lenders that are out there, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Calico, Live Oak, amongst others, and they can help you make those determinations. There are some veterinary specific banks that are out there and very good resources to help you answer these questions. And I would strongly look at many of those different resources amongst others that help guide potential buyers. And there's some specific consultants who help buyers make sure they make the right decisions. And sometimes the owners have many more people supporting them than the buyers do. But anytime you as a buyer can get people on your side to protect you, I think that's very important to look at when you're moving forward. So in answer to your question, I think it works to your favor if you can close the deal to buy the house ahead of time and then start to look to buy the practice. You now have a piece of property that you own, and I think they can go a long way in your favor. And let me just say, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a bank, I'm not a financial planner, I'm just a veterinarian like the rest of you who has enough information to be dangerous.
You're doing great. Do you know about how much capital or down payment you need to purchase a practice? I assume this attendee is asking about percentage.
It depending on the practice, but usually around 10%. Some banks will go lower, some banks want higher, but just let's use 10% as a round number.
Okay, that sounds good. And you did answer the question about a partnership. Is it a good idea to bring in a partner, or is it a good idea to go in with a partner right? Do you have any opinion, or right away you go in with somebody, or is it something that you would want to start out on your own?
I think it's a great question. For a buying of a larger practice, you might be better served to have a partner in there, because now if it's a multi-million-dollar practice, there are two of you to generate income that are focused from an ownership standpoint. But when it comes to partnerships, the biggest problem that we see with partnerships is you have to do some dating ahead of time before you get married, is what I'm trying to say, is you've got to know the partner. You've got to know where their strengths are. You've got to know what their weaknesses are. You got to know what their focus is. You know what the perfect partnership is? I don't like surgery. He likes surgery. Great. We can be a perfect partnership. I like to run the business. He likes to be a clinician. And you focus on what your strengths are. If you partner with your weaknesses, that's great. If you partner with your strengths, then you might start to be competing with one another for who's going to do what. So I think partnerships are a great idea. In fact, I would suggest consolidation of individual practices is a great idea, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But if you have a friend, a colleague, a manager that you know really, really well, and you can work together to make decisions on certain important things before you sign a partnership agreement, then go for it. But I do think you have to take your time to make sure that this partnership is going to work and that you have a common vision and a common mission and common values foundationally, so that you can build a successful business together, because you will spend more time together as partners in many cases than you spend with your family. I mentioned something about merging of practices. Fully 50% of the practices out there, small animal hospital practices, are one or two doctor practices. The economics of running a small business are better when the practice size pushes that 3 or 4 doctor, 3, 4, 5 doctor size. If you can get practices in a community to consolidate into a larger building with 3 doctors running that business, the economies of scale, the profitability for that group practice will be higher in most cases than any individual practice. So one of the things to think about in the models that we're looking down the road at might be individual practices being sold to individual owners who then merge together into a larger building where they now own the building as well. So you can look at things differently. And it's, again, we need to reimagine how we deliver veterinary medicine going forward, as we've seen happen in other healthcare fields, and we need to take control of that, because the single doctor practice is very profitable in the right hands, but very challenging from a life balance standpoint going forward. So I think thinking of different ways to deliver veterinary medicine is a whole another discussion we can come up with at some point.
Right. Well, we are running out of time. I do have one question which I thought was good that came in, and is it reasonable for somebody who is in their mid to late 50s to buy a practice? Is it too late to help their retirement in 10 or more years?
No, it's not. The right practice. I wouldn't buy a startup. I wouldn't start a startup, but I think if you could buy into a practice that has the potential for change, for growth, for increased profitability, not the current growth at 3 to 4%. I think you're going to have to look at a practice that can grow 8 to 10 or 15% per year. So the value of that practice over the next 10 years can even double. Then I think the return would be great. I think if you're going to just grow by cost of living, probably not going to give you the great return over 10 years if you're looking at a 10-year investment. So as if you were to look at a stock and see which stocks have grown most geometrically versus linearly over time, you have to find a practice to buy that you can take from a very flat growth to a meteoric growth so that you can get that good return over time. That's my thoughts. I don't have a problem with practice purchases in the 50s or 60s, but you have to buy the right practice so that you can take something that hasn't necessarily been growing all that rapidly, make it grow rapidly so that you get a huge return after your 10 or 12 years of investment. You don't have as long a period of time if somebody who's going to buy and hold something for 20 or 30 years.
Well, wonderful. Well, and so you did leave your slide with your contact information up. Is it okay if people contact you with their questions? Because we didn't get to all of them.
Absolutely. Bear with me. I've got a whole variety of full-time jobs that I'm involved with, but I will do my best to get back to people with questions in a timely fashion. And again, I appreciate everybody for taking time away from their busy schedules, and I hope you found that this presentation was to give you some food for thought. I'm not here to change the world. I'm just here to give you some food for thought.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed today's presentation. The recording will be posted in a few days at avma.org/career webinars, where you'll also find information on future webinars as they're scheduled.